everyone. Thanks for joining us for this WTTW News Special. I'm Brandis Friedman. Tonight, we're focusing on Chicago's drop in violent crime. A Cook County judge allows Chicago's police misconduct agency to investigate fatal officer shootings. And many U.S. cities, Chicago included, saw a decline in homicides and shootings last year. What drove that and how to sustain it going forward? We'll get into our focus on policing in just a moment, but first off tonight, advocates are sounding the alarm on new federal job requirements kicking in next week for recipients of SNAP benefits.
If you're falling within that criteria, you don't have a lot of marketable skills, you don't have a lot of time, you have some mobility issues, you've got a background, well, your job opportunity are slim and non-existent. So they're terrified.
Starting February 1st, many people who receive the benefit, formerly known as food stamps, will need to work, volunteer, or participate in qualifying education for at least 80 hours a month to continue to receive it. People who qualify for an exemption, like those with dependents under 14 years old or individuals who have a disability, should notify the Illinois Department of Human Services before the May 1st deadline. SNAP participants who don't meet the work requirements will be limited to 3 months of benefits over 3 years before losing assistance entirely. The Greater Chicago Food Depository estimates that 450,000 Illinoisans are at risk of losing their benefits on May 1st. A man in prison for 23 years is expected to be released tonight for what advocates say was yet another case of wrongful conviction.
My son had a clemency on his desk for over 4 years, and he never looked at it.
Still ain't answered.
He never looked at it, at my son's clemency or anything. And I'm just so glad that Josh stepped in and took my son's case and got him free, and I thank the judge as well.
50-year-old Antonio Porter was convicted of murder charges back in 2003, but advocates say he was tortured by Chicago police detectives and no physical or DNA evidence ever tied him to the murder of Lamond Harrison. Recently, a Cook County judge vacated his 65-year sentence. Porter has been ordered released on electronic monitoring as he awaits a new trial. And today is the 40th anniversary of one of the great moments in Chicago sports history. Walter Payton, Jim McMahon, Refrigerator Perry, and the rest of the Super Bowl shuffling crew took home the Bears' first and so far only Super Bowl championship. Fans rejoiced, having waited 26 long years since the team's previous NFL championship in 1963. Little did they know that would remain the team's only Super Bowl victory for the next 40 years and counting. When the Bears beat the New England Patriots 46-10, it was the first Super Bowl appearance for each team. Yesterday, though, the Patriots won the AFC Championship, sending the franchise to a record 12th Super Bowl appearance. They've won 6. As for the Bears, they returned just that one time, losing to the Colts after the 2006 season. But it's been an exciting 2025 season, so maybe there is hope for fans. Bear down. Up next, the agency charged with holding CPD accountable can investigate police shootings. That's right after this.
WTTW news coverage of policing and police reform is supported by the Joyce Foundation.
State law does not prevent Chicago's Police Misconduct Agency, the Civilian Office of Police Accountability, from investigating fatal officer shootings. That's the ruling from a Cook County judge in a lawsuit brought by the city's largest police union that threatened to upend the system the city uses to probe the most serious allegations of police misconduct. Our Heather Sharon joins us now with more. Heather, so we know the Fraternal Order of Police Lodge 7, which represents rank-and-file police officers, they have long contended that investigators from the agency that we call COPA were illegally investigating fatal shootings. But Judge Michael Mullen rejected that argument. Why?
Well, he ruled that state law does not require COPA investigators to either be sworn law enforcement officers or to undergo the same training that homicide detectives need to undergo before they're allowed to be the lead investigator in investigating a homicide. He said that investigators with COPA get an appropriate amount of training for what they are asked to do. Now, John Catanzara, the president of the police union, didn't respond to my requests for comment. Had this lawsuit been successful, or if this ruling is overturned on appeal, as you said, it will overturn the way the city investigates fatal police shootings and other deaths.
CPD officers killed 9 people in 2025. That is more than in any year since 2021. How are those investigations conducted?
Well, COPA is charged not with determining whether there was criminality involved in those deaths, but just whether CPD's policies regarding the use of force were followed. After those investigations are concluded, they turn over that evidence to the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, which determines whether the officers should be charged with a crime. The judge ruled that since that evidence is not directly used by COPA to charge officers with wrongdoing, they do not need to be sworn law enforcement agents.
So the police union's lawsuit, it also alleged that the city has been improperly keeping video captured by officers' body-worn cameras. How did the judge rule on that claim?
He said state law is clear. The city cannot and should not be maintaining this video after 90 days unless it is flagged for further review. And there are only 7 specific reasons why that video can be retained. Apparently, the city has been keeping all of these videos and has between 14 million and 20 million videos in its system that the judge says must be destroyed by the end of March. And he ordered the city to immediately stop maintaining this video past 90 days. I asked the city's law department for a response to that ruling. They said they are reviewing the entire ruling, but declined to comment further.
Okay, that is a lot of video, as we know. All right, Heather Sharon, thank you so much.
Thanks, Brandis.
And you can read Heather's full story on our website. It's all at WTTW.com/news. 2025 saw a reduction in violent crime in Chicago. Last year, there were 417 people who died from a homicide. That's down nearly 30% from the previous year and is a 60-year low in the city. It's also a nearly 50% decline from the COVID-era high of 805 homicides the city had in 2021. The decline in violent crime echoes a trend we're seeing nationwide. However, more work still lies ahead in preventing shootings and saving lives. Joining us now are Gary Ann Gatewood, Deputy Mayor of Chicago for Community Safety, Eddie Bocanegra, former Senior Advisor to the Assistant Attorney General at the U.S. Department of Justice and Executive Director of Noah's Ark Foundation, Reverend Sierra Bates Chamberlain, Executive Director of Live Free Illinois, and Andy Wheeler, Interim Co-Director of Trauma, Recovery, and Injury Prevention at Stroger Hospital at Cook County Health. I can say Cook County Health. Welcome, all 4 of you, and thank you for joining us for this.
Thanks for having us. Thank you.
So, Reverend, I want to start with you. What is your reaction when you hear these numbers?
So as someone who has been working to address gun violence for years, quite naturally, it's exciting to hear that the community solutions are working. However, we do know that there are many people in our communities on the south and west side of Chicago who may not necessarily feel the numbers that are being reported.
Right, and I want to get into both of those as we talk. Andrew, is this decline something that you all feel like you've noticed at the hospital?
Yeah, for sure. I think during the few years during the pandemic, we had this massive surge, and it was very taxing on our staff and our communities. But I think the past year or so, everything has felt much more manageable, and it's been very promising.
Deputy Mayor, what do we know? What do we know works to reduce gun violence?
Like Reverend Bates Chamberlain said, I think it's a lot of collaboration from community-based organizations, the work that we're doing with the police department, and being very intentional about how we use our resources and our partners. We've seen violence decrease year over year pretty considerably, but then we had a 60-year low, so it's really a big challenge to make sure not only do we keep up that work, but we work to save more lives in this year and the years ahead.
Eddie Bocanegra, supporting the work of Community Violence Intervention, CVI, as it's often called, a big part of your previous role at the U.S. Department of Justice. We hear CVI a lot, so for folks who are sort of new to that conversation, tell us what it is and what it looks like.
Yeah, so CVI is an acronym for Community Violence Intervention. It is an approach that community actually helped define by incorporating all levels of supports for people who are at the highest risk of gun involvement, either victimization or perpetration. And so our efforts at DOJ would support that specific group of people that typically in most cities account for 60–70% of the violence, but really represent about 1% or less.
Okay. Reverend, it's of course, it's one thing to see a decrease in homicides, but there are some victims and families of victims who don't get that closure. And your organization, you all have worked to pass the Homicide Data Transparency Act in Illinois. Tell us about that. What does it do?
Sure. So a major piece of violence reduction, in our opinion, is addressing clearance rates. And some of the clearance rates does not mean necessarily solve rates. So clearance rates basically is how the department is measuring the cases that are closed, not necessarily solved. And so once we identified the discrepancy on how it was being communicated to community, we developed the Homicide Data Transparency Act so that we can ensure that that data was made transparency to community so that we can be able to see how many cases were actually being solved within that particular year.
So a cleared case could be, is there an example that comes to mind that a case that is cleared but not solved? There's not someone who has been arrested and adjudicated in court for it.
Sure. So for example, someone can be cleared through exceptional means, which means that the police may feel that they have significant evidence, but they may not be able to close the case because they believe that that person is deceased. So then that means that the case will be cleared through exceptional means, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's solved. So some of the issues with that is and where we've had many conversations, either with the previous state's attorneys or within CPD and within community, a lot of times we are looking and seeing that they may, back in, well, this was data from about 23, where the reports with clearance rates were about 54%. But then when we FOIA'd CPD, we identified that in Inglewood, there will be about 7 to 13% of those cases closed. And so that is the work that we're trying to sort of lay out and say we have a huge issue around, one, how we're talking about clearance rates, the importance of making sure that communities understand solve rates, and then how we can work within CPD, work with the state's attorney, work across the state, because it's not only a Chicago issue, but we really need to improve clearance rates, solve rates, because if people are not, it's just the right thing to do. Families who lose loved ones deserve to know that justice was served, but then we also need to make sure that we're not creating spaces where people want to take law enforcement into their own hands because they don't believe that justice will be served.
Deputy Mayor, what is the city doing to ensure that homicides and other crimes, of course, are actually getting solved?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a great question. So a lot of work has gone into improving clearance rates. I think last year's clearance rate was one of the highest we've had in the last decade. What is happening is work across the bureaus. So you have the Bureau of Detectives, the Bureau of Patrol, the Bureau of Counterterrorism, all working together across the board to work to solve those cases. Now, to the reference point, when you talk about clearance rates, they're using the national standard, the FBI standard. So a homicide that may have happened last year, and if it's cleared this year, it goes into this year's clearance rate. Now, what I will say is for those families who get that closure, they don't care when it was solved. They're glad that they had closure. When they can get that closure. And I think it's a really good thing that not only are we looking at improving the homicide clearance rates, but also non-fatal shootings, right? Because I know a lot of focal point comes on homicides. We're really thinking about how we can hold people accountable who are causing harm in communities overall. And I think another way we get to those better clearance rates is by people communicating the things that they are seeing and really letting people know who's causing harm in those communities, so we can take the necessary resources between the police department, OEMC, the state's attorney's office, and all really work together to try to bring closure to those families.
Andrew, walk us through sort of what happens at Stroger Hospital when someone experiences a shooting, when you've got a victim that comes in.
Yeah, when a patient comes in, it activates a whole team of people, a very large team of a multidisciplinary team of physicians, nurses, respiratory techs, x-ray techs, et cetera, whose goal is to really, keep that person alive and save their life. And most people who arrive in the trauma unit who have a pulse when they arrive will survive. And since the vast majority of shooting victims will survive, it's our duty to provide them with the proper wraparound care. And so what our team provides, our trauma recovery and intervention program provides, is that type of service. So they're able to connect with a social worker, we call a trauma intervention specialist, or somebody called a community resource navigator that can provide that patient with inpatient crisis intervention, mental health care for them and their families. And then based upon the needs assessment we have, if they need follow-up care, we can provide that. Or we also work within this vast network within the city to make sure they can get connected to CVI organizations, housing organizations, or other types of services that they may need.
You say it's your duty as the hospital to provide that sort of wraparound care, and maybe that includes, mental health care as well. But it sounds like the programming that you all do, it's more than just health, right? You've got social workers and folks who can help with, is it housing, is it employment, like what are the other needs you have? And providing that as a service in the hospital, is that not a shift in the narrative and in the kind of treatment that a hospital would give for a gun shooting victim?
It is a shift, and I started in the trauma unit about 13 years ago, and at that time a lot of people would be like, what is this thing that you're doing? And nowadays, out of a lot of the work that the folks here in our communities and leaders have done, is now it's more of a standard of care. And this is what people mean by approaching gun violence as a public health issue. It's a shift away from a moral judgment or thinking that you can incarcerate your way out of the problem, and using a public health approach, saying, we understand that somebody who's a victim of gun violence is at very high risk of being injured again, injuring somebody else, or being incarcerated. And so you tailor your interventions to mitigate that risk.
Eddie, a lot of credit has gone to the work of CVI in reducing crime rates, but there are so many factors. And, as we mentioned earlier, this is something that nationwide that other cities are experiencing as well, this decline. What else do you think could be behind this nationwide decline in violence that we're seeing?
Well, I think, there's a few things. Well, also the Department of Justice, we pushed out about $300 million. Unfortunately, half of those funds got cut with the new administration. Different priorities. Community public safety was not a priority of the current administration. But having said that, what we did see in those 3+ years while I was at the Department of Justice, we saw stronger relations between CVI organizations and law enforcement. You could look at some of the cities like Kansas City, Chicago, LA, New York. Clearly, these are places that there are strong relationships there. There are also organizations besides CVI, organizations that are coming together to provide more of the wraparound services. We are seeing better data and research to emphasize not only the quality of the service that people are receiving, but also the impact that it's having. Chicago is a prime example because it's given birth to two big research projects here, one by Northwestern and one by the University of Chicago's Crime Lab, which is the RCT of Ready Chicago.
Okay. Reverend, we talk about homicides falling overall, but domestic homicides have also climbed, according to police data. What more needs to be done to address gender-based violence?
I believe that we have to continue to invest in community organizations, continue to invest into root cause solutions, and then more importantly, I think we really have to continue to make those investments in mental health. So that people can receive the counseling and the trauma services that they need. We know most of the times when people are victims or survivors of domestic violence that they're stuck in some type of cycle. And we break those cycles by making sure that people are able to get the resources and the supports that they need to have. And so, for example, we have the Community Healing Resource Centers Network within Live Free, Illinois, which is to address issues that trauma related to gun violence and incarceration. However, a lot of our sites receive families who have been survivors of domestic violence or trying to get out of those situations. And so again, I think a major piece is making sure that families have the supports and resources that they need. And even in this place where we see a lot of budget cuts, these are the areas that we need to protect to make sure that we're protecting these families.
If I could add on to that piece, we've done some work to really expand training to see the signs of gender-based violence. We're working with CVI organizations like the ones Eddie's mentioned to really have folks be able to identify signs that they see in domestic violence. As a city, we increased the dollars that we were putting into identifying gender-based violence and really making sure we get wraparound support for those victims. We're actually going to add a pillar for gender-based violence to the People's Plan for Community Safety. So it won't just be an offset, it'll be a focal point of the city's safety network and the planning going forward.
Yes, because those funds were a point of contention during the budget season this past year. Eddie, go ahead.
Yeah, so a couple of things I do actually want to build on, as a matter of fact. So being in DOJ gave me the kind of the bird's eye view of what's happening across the country. And I would say Chicago by far has the deepest investments in CVI. Since 2016, we put so much billions of dollars into this kind of efforts, which I'm not surprised that we've seen the kind of reductions, the 30+ reduction of gun violence here, and it's been declining for the last several years. But here's the bottom line, is that the city of Chicago, state of Illinois, and our Cook County has also seen this emerge a workforce of people who are doing the CVI work, where they're investing in their development and training, they're creating career pathways for individuals, right, that addresses or being trained around trauma support and wraparound services. They're encouraging more of the collaboration, and that's really important for us to know, because that is one of the best ways that we are seeing evidence around reduction of gun violence.
Deputy Mayor, we also saw, as I mentioned, this decline in homicides around the country. So I want to pull up a graph from Chicago Crime Lab, as you mentioned. It shows how the city's recent decline in homicide, it echoes that of other cities. I believe that to be St. Louis that's at the top there, folks. To what extent would you say the city can take credit for these decreases in violence? Kind of similar to that question to Eddie about what are some of the other reasons for this decline beyond CVI work?
Yeah, when it comes to credit, I think the credit goes to the people who live in the city of Chicago, people who have been working to bring violence down. It's not a single policy, it is literally everyone working together to drive violence down throughout the city. And I will tell you, like when we talk about the national trends of violence going down, that's a trend we should all be excited about, because that means there are more people alive, fewer people causing harm, and there's a bigger opportunity for us to do better. So I think the work that's happening across the city of Chicago can be replicated in other parts of the country. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask, what does that work include, right?
Yeah.
Because like even the crime lab has pointed to, it could be education improving and graduation rates getting better. I mean, it could be any number of like actual tangible factors around the city that means lower violence.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's a myriad of factors, right? There's a focus on improving housing. There's a focus on holding people accountable who cause harm. There's a focus on actually clearing cases and holding people accountable. There are more resources that are put into youth jobs. There's more resources that will be put into jobs for adults. Expansion of CVI for the first time in the history of the city of Chicago. We had 2 lead organizations lead our CVI work. We've also, for the first time in the history of the city, put dollars into hospital-based violence prevention that he was speaking to earlier. So really expanding where we're putting our resources is really helping us see the results that we've seen. And just again, that level of collaboration we're seeing across the entire cabinet, not just with folks inside of government, and we do have great collaboration with our partners in the county and the state, but really our partners in faith, business, all of us working together.
Andrew, I want to get you in here before we run out of time. You know, we've talked a little bit about sort of like the shifting to a public health approach to reducing violence. Tell us more about that and how, I guess, how other hospitals, how the rest of the country sort of gets in on that as well.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, using a public health approach means you're identifying risk and providing the right intervention at a time and then scaling it out. And so we work with our other level 1 trauma centers within the city of Chicago, and we work with a lot of the CVI organizations throughout the city. Also, just to comment on how it goes nationally, is we're part of a national network called the Health Alliance for Violence Intervention, or the HAVI, and which has done a lot of great work of, like Eddie mentioned, of standardizing practice of CVI work and using research to, you know, we can all use research that we can share to our partners in other cities as well.
Okay, Eddie, we've got like 30 seconds left. What can you say about your role at DOJ and why you ended up leaving that? In 30 seconds.
30 seconds?
15 seconds.
It was an incredible opportunity to be appointed there and then become a career Fed. But people should know that community safety is not a priority of this administration. You can tell by the cuts and where the investments are at or not. And I think there is a level of us, Chicago, modeling to the rest of the United States of what community looks like in partnerships with business and others.
All right, good to have you back. Thank you so much to all of our panelists, Deputy Mayor Garen Gatewood, Eddie Bocanegra, Reverend Sierra Bates-Chamberlain, and Andy Wheeler. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that is our show for this Monday night. Stay connected with our reporters and what they're working on by following us on Instagram at WTTW Chicago, and join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and 10:30. 3 high-ranking members of the Roman Catholic Church, including Chicago Cardinal Blaise Cupich, criticizing recent foreign policy moves by the Trump administration. Cardinal Cupich joins us to discuss. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm, righting the heaviest wrongs for more than 40 years.